Imagine a noble Roman senator, clad in a toga edged with purple, symbolizing his illustrious lineage, trembling as he ascends the marble steps leading to the Palatine Palace, knowing that tonight might mark the end of his family's honor, all due to the depravity of a mad emperor. This video presents a journey into Emperor's Deadly Depravity, how Caligula's sex rituals destroyed families, the emperor's deadly corruption, and how Caligula's sexual rituals shattered families. A distinctive narrative because it not only exposes the dark corners of history, but also reveals the mechanisms of power that transform humans into monsters, enabling you to reevaluate the essence of ambition and morality. Envision yourself as a Roman official in the year 38 AD, attending an imperial banquet under the flickering candlelight reflecting off statues of deities. Yet the atmosphere is oppressive, with maniacal laughter echoing from the corridors. And within you surges a silent fear, questioning whether loyalty to the empire is worth sacrificing your wife and children to the emperor's debauched games. By watching this video to the end, you will not only grasp hidden historical truths, but also derive profound lessons on the abuse of power, psychological trauma, and the fragility of society, assisting you in identifying and resisting similar forms of corruption in the modern world. Do not avert your eyes from the screen, for these secrets not only destroyed ancient Roman families, but may also awaken your awareness of the shadows of power that persist today. The bloody secrets of Caligula's childhood. Imagine a 7-year-old boy with innocent eyes witnessing his father's body being brought back to Rome amid the empire's collective grief. Yet he knows that behind this death lies a dark conspiracy orchestrated by the emperor himself, transforming childhood into an unending sequence of fear and irreplaceable loss. Continuing the exploration of Caligula's deadly depravity, we begin with the early years that shaped this figure of absolute power, where family tragedy became the foundation for his later corruption. Born in 12 AD with the full name Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, Caligula was the third surviving child of 6 born to Germanicus, a talented general beloved by the Roman people, and Agrippina the elder from the prestigious Julio-Claudian lineage. From a young age, the boy accompanied his father on campaigns in Germania, where soldiers affectionately called him Caligula, meaning little boot, due to the miniature soldier's uniform he wore, creating an endearing mascot image amid the battlefield. However, this childhood swiftly descended into bloodshed. In 19 AD, his father, Germanicus, died suddenly in Antioch, Syria, at the age of 33, with suspicions of poisoning by the governor Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso, possibly on orders from Emperor Tiberius, who feared Germanicus's popularity. The body was escorted back to Rome by Agrippina and the children, including Caligula, in a grand funeral procession. But this marked only the beginning of the tragedy. Relations between Agrippina and Tiberius deteriorated, leading to a purge. In 29 AD, Agrippina and Caligula's brother Nero were accused of treason and exiled. Agrippina died in 33 AD from starvation and torture, while Nero committed suicide, and brother Drusus perished in prison. Caligula, now a teenager, was sent to live with his great-grandmother Livia, then his grandmother Antonia Minor, and in 31 AD was summoned to Capri under Tiberius's supervision, where he had to learn to conceal his resentment, feigning obedience to avoid his siblings' fate. According to historians Tacitus and Suetonius, Caligula developed skills in play acting for survival, relying on the protection of the Praetorian prefect Naevius Sutorius Macro. But these losses deeply etched psychological pain, nurturing suspicion and a thirst for dominance in his future. The clear lesson from this blood-soaked childhood is that personal tragedy under tyrannical power can transform an innocent child into a vengeful tyrant, reminding us that the origins of depravity often lie in unhealed wounds from the past. However, if childhood planted the seeds of darkness, the initial beloved ascension to the throne deceived the entire empire. Let us explore that transformation in the next chapter. The initial beloved ascension to the throne. Imagine a young man of 24 ascending the imperial throne amid thunderous cheers from the Roman masses, his name chanted in the streets as the Savior who would restore glory after years of tyrannical gloom. Yet this triumphant beginning concealed the seeds of darkness sown in his fractured past. Building upon the bloody secrets of Caligula's childhood that forged his resilient facade, we now turn to his accession to power in 37 AD, a period of initial promise that captivated the empire and masked the impending storm of depravity. Following the death of Tiberius in March 37 AD, amid rumors of smothering by Caligula's ally, the Praetorian prefect Macro, the Roman people erupted in joy at the prospect of a new era. Caligula, as the surviving son of the revered Germanicus, embodied hope for renewal after Tiberius's paranoid and reclusive rule, which had seen political purges, economic strain, and cultural stagnation. At 24 years old, he was hailed as the youthful antidote to decades of imperial senescence. His first 7 months in power were marked by calculated benevolence. He recalled political exiles, including his sisters Agrippina the Younger and Julia Livilla, abolished treason trials, granted generous bonuses to the Praetorian Guard and urban cohorts, and organized spectacular public games, including chariot races and gladiatorial contests that drew massive crowds to the Circus Maximus. Ancient sources, such as Philo of Alexandria in his Embassy to Gaius, describe how Caligula initially presented himself as a model ruler, paying respects to the Senate by allowing them veto powers and publicly burning Tiberius's incriminating documents. The populace, starved for spectacle and stability, adored him. Coins minted in his image celebrated his lineage, and temples overflowed with offerings for his health. This honeymoon phase exemplified a masterful public relations strategy, leveraging his tragic family history to garner sympathy while consolidating military loyalty. However, beneath this facade lurked the psychological scars from his youth, which would soon erode his restraint. The clear lesson from this deceptive dawn is that initial displays of virtue in leadership can often serve as veils for underlying instabilities, teaching us to scrutinize the foundations of power beyond surface charisma to prevent the rise of unchecked authority. Yet, if this beloved ascension painted Caligula as a beacon of hope, a mysterious illness would soon shatter that illusion, propelling him into a realm of unbridled madness that we must examine next. The brain fever that changed everything. Imagine a young emperor, once the darling of Rome, writhing in delirium on his imperial bed, his body convulsing with fever that ravages his mind, emerging not as the benevolent ruler the empire cherished, but as a fractured soul unbound by any moral restraint, forever altered by the shadows of near death. As the initial beloved ascension to the throne showcased Caligula's calculated charm and public adoration, a pivotal crisis in late 37 AD would irrevocably shatter this facade, unleashing the latent darkness cultivated from his traumatic youth. In October 37 AD, mere months into his reign, Caligula was struck by a severe illness that ancient historians, including Suetonius in the 12 Caesars, described as a brain fever, possibly encephalitis, poisoning, or a neurological disorder exacerbated by stress and his family's history of intrigue. The affliction was so intense that it halted the empire's operations. Rome held collective vigils, with temples overflowing in prayers for the recovery of their star emperor, whose early acts of generosity had won universal acclaim. For days, he teetered on the brink of death, experiencing hallucinations and seizures that left him incoherent, attended by physicians who could offer little beyond herbal remedies and bloodletting. Contemporary accounts from Philo and Cassius Dio suggest the illness may have caused permanent brain damage, impairing his impulse control and amplifying paranoid tendencies inherited from Tiberius's court. Upon recovery in early 38 AD, those closest to him, such as his sisters and Macro, noted profound changes. The once prudent leader now exhibited erratic behavior, extravagant spending on lavish games, and a growing megalomania, declaring himself above human laws. This transformation was not immediate to the public. It manifested first in private excesses, like increased demands on palace staff, but soon escalated into public spectacles of cruelty. Modern scholars, drawing on medical analyses, propose conditions like temporal lobe epilepsy or hyperthyroidism, which could explain his volatile moods, hypersexuality, and delusions of divinity. The episode marked a turning point, stripping away his veneer of sanity and emboldening him to wield absolute power without boundaries, as if death's proximity had liberated his suppressed rage. The evident lesson from this neurological catastrophe is that physical ailments, when intertwined with unchecked authority, can catalyze profound moral decay, underscoring the fragility of leadership and the need for institutional safeguards against personal vulnerabilities that endanger societies. Nevertheless, as this brain fever unlocked Caligula's darker impulses, the first victims emerged in the shadows of the palace, compelling us to uncover the initial abuses inflicted upon its vulnerable slaves. Abusing slaves in the palace shadows. Envision a dimly lit corridor in the imperial palace where a young slave trembles at the sound of approaching footsteps, knowing that the emperor's whim could summon them to endure unspeakable violations in the name of his unchecked desires, their humanity reduced to mere instruments of his dominance. Following the brain fever that stripped away Caligula's moral constraints, the imperial palace became a stage for his emerging depravity, with the most vulnerable, its slaves, bearing the initial brunt of his sexual tyranny in the hidden corners of power. By early 38 AD, Caligula's transformation manifested in private, away from the public's adoring gaze. The sprawling Palatine Hill Palace, with its labyrinthine corridors and opulent chambers, housed hundreds of slaves, men, women, and youths, who performed tasks from cooking to guarding the emperor's quarters. According to Suetonius in the 12 Caesars, Caligula began prowling these halls at night, selecting slaves at random to satisfy his escalating sexual appetites. These were not consensual encounters, but acts of coercion rooted in the emperor's realization that his absolute power rendered resistance futile. A chilling example involves a young male slave, possibly a Greek or Syrian captive, summoned to Caligula's private chambers. Forced to participate in degrading acts, the slave faced the stark choice of compliance or execution, as refusal could doom not only themselves but their peers. Female slaves, often tasked with cleaning or serving meals, faced even greater peril. Ancient sources, cloaked in euphemism, describe Caligula's nocturnal demands as violations that shattered Roman notions of dignity. These acts were less about personal gratification than about asserting dominance, a psychological need to control those who mirrored the powerlessness he felt in his youth under Tiberius. The slaves, legally property with no recourse, endured in silence, their suffering invisible to the elite dining above in gilded halls. The palace staff, once accustomed to serving under Tiberius's reclusive austerity, now lived in constant dread, with entire shifts avoiding eye contact to evade selection. This marked the genesis of Caligula's use of sex as a weapon, a practice that would soon escalate beyond the palace's underbelly. The stark lesson here is that unchecked power first targets the most defenseless, exploiting their voicelessness to test the limits of cruelty, reminding us that protecting society's margins is essential to preventing the spread of tyranny's rot. Yet, as Caligula's depravity took root among the palace slaves, his gaze soon turned to the empire's elite, leading us to explore the humiliation he inflicted upon the wives and daughters of Rome's high officials. Humiliating the wives and daughters of high officials. Envision a proud Roman matron, adorned in the finest silks and bearing the dignity of her noble lineage, summoned to a private audience with the emperor only to face a chilling ultimatum: submit to his depraved desires or condemn her entire family to ruin, her honor shattered in the name of imperial power. As Caligula's nocturnal abuses of palace slaves revealed the depths of his emerging tyranny, his hunger for domination extended upward, ensnaring the wives and daughters of Rome's elite in a calculated campaign of sexual humiliation, designed to dismantle the very foundations of their social order. By 38 AD, Caligula's depravity had escalated beyond the palace's underbelly to target the empire's most respected families. Senators, military commanders, and wealthy merchants, men whose names carried centuries of Roman prestige, found their wives and daughters summoned to private audiences under the guise of discussing family honors or political appointments. According to Suetonius in the 12 Caesars, these encounters were predatory traps. Caligula would compel these women, raised under strict Roman codes of chastity and virtue, to perform degrading sexual acts while he watched from his throne, often orchestrating scenarios where multiple women were forced to compete for his favor. One harrowing account details a senator's wife, likely from the gens Cornelia, ordered to strip naked and perform intimate acts in the emperor's presence while her husband waited outside, aware that resistance could lead to execution or exile for their entire lineage. These acts were not mere indulgence, but deliberate assaults on Roman dignitas, stripping families of their social capital. Caligula reveled in the psychological torture, forcing women to comply under the gaze of their peers, knowing their husbands and fathers could only watch in impotent rage, as protest meant death. The women, caught between personal honor and family survival, suffered profound trauma, with some descending into despair or mental collapse as their virtue, central to Roman feminine identity, was publicly defiled. The emperor's actions destabilized the elite class, undermining the Senate's authority by reducing its members to powerless spectators of their family's degradation. This campaign of humiliation extended to daughters, some barely of marriageable age, further amplifying the horror. The lesson here is stark. Power wielded to degrade and control can fracture the social bonds that sustain societies, reminding us that protecting individual dignity is crucial to preventing the erosion of collective trust and stability. Yet, as Caligula's assaults on noble families shattered personal honor, his depravity soon transformed palace gatherings into spectacles of collective degradation, urging us to uncover the horrifying orgies that emerged from his twisted banquets. Banquets turned into horrifying orgies. Envision a lavish Roman banquet where the elite gather under golden candelabras, toasting to the empire's glory, only for the night to spiral into a depraved orgy orchestrated by an emperor whose laughter masks a cruel intent to strip his guests of all dignity. As Caligula's assaults on noble families shattered the personal honor of Rome's elite, his depravity evolved into public spectacles, transforming the palace's social gatherings into nightmarish displays of collective humiliation that ensnared entire families in his web of control. By 39 AD, Caligula's palace banquets had become infamous traps, beginning with the veneer of civilized festivity, but inevitably descending into orchestrated chaos. Initially, these dinners adhered to Roman tradition. Senators, their wives, and daughters dined on exotic dishes like peacock and flamingo, reclining on couches in the Palatine's grand triclinium, surrounded by frescoes of gods and heroes. Yet, as recounted by Cassius Dio in his Roman history, the atmosphere would shift when Caligula, with a theatrical flourish, issued demands that shattered decorum. One documented incident involved a senator named Marcus Junius Silanus, whose wife was singled out during a feast. Caligula, with a mocking tone, declared her beauty worthy of imperial attention, forcing her to perform sexual acts before the assembled guests, while her husband and children watched, paralyzed by the threat of execution. These events were meticulously staged. The emperor would call for specific acts, sometimes involving multiple participants, to degrade the attendees, compelling husbands to witness their wives' violation or risk annihilation. The psychological torment was calculated. Nobles were forced to maintain composure, smiling through their shame to preserve their families' lives, while Caligula reveled in their silent agony. These orgies eroded the Roman social hierarchy, as senators, once pillars of authority, were reduced to complicit spectators, their status mocked by the emperor's whims. Women, raised to embody Roman virtue, faced public degradation that fractured family bonds, with marriages collapsing under the weight of forced infidelity. The palace, meant to symbolize Rome's grandeur, became a stage for moral decay, where loyalty to the emperor demanded the surrender of personal and familial honor. The stark lesson from these horrifying banquets is that power, when used to orchestrate public degradation, can dismantle societal cohesion, teaching us that safeguarding collective dignity requires resisting manipulative spectacles that exploit vulnerability for control. Yet, as these banquets turned Rome's elite into pawns of humiliation, Caligula's ambition grew darker, leading us to explore how he redesigned the palace itself into a secret brothel to institutionalize his depravity. Transforming the palace into a secret brothel, envision the majestic Palatine Palace, once a bastion of Roman governance, now hollowed out into a labyrinth of depravity, its sacred halls repurposed as a clandestine brothel where the emperor's whims turn noble women into unwilling pawns in a grotesque theater of power. As Caligula's horrifying banquets degraded Rome's elite into spectacles of public shame, his ambition to institutionalize his control took a darker turn, leading him to redesign the imperial palace itself into a secret brothel that formalized his sexual tyranny over the empire's most prominent families. By 40 AD, Caligula's depravity had reached new depths, with the Palatine Hill complex undergoing physical transformations to accommodate his escalating fantasies. According to Suetonius in the 12 Caesars and archaeological hints from the Palatine excavations, the emperor commissioned specialized chambers designed for sexual activities, including a room styled like a small amphitheater, with tiered seating encircling a central stage. Here, Caligula would orchestrate performances involving slaves, captives, and coerced Roman citizens, compelling senators and their families to watch and applaud as if attending a theatrical spectacle. A notorious example involved the wife of a disgraced senator, possibly from the gens Valeria, forced to serve in what amounted to a palace-run brothel. Stripped of her status, she was made to cater to the emperor, his guests, and even foreign dignitaries, with Caligula himself directing the encounters like a stage manager, his commentary laced with mockery to amplify the humiliation. These rooms replaced traditional furnishings with couches arranged for visibility, and the emperor's own bedroom was equipped with viewing areas, allowing audiences to witness his acts as demonstrations of absolute dominion. This brothel was staffed primarily by the wives and daughters of senators who had fallen out of favor, their noble lineage weaponized against them as they serviced soldiers, merchants, or allies to secure their family's survival. The operation was methodical, with Caligula overseeing schedules and assigning roles, turning sacred spaces into markets of flesh. Psychologically, this eroded the Roman aristocracy's foundation, as families saw their heritage reduced to commodities, while the Senate's authority crumbled under the emperor's perverse control. The palace, meant to symbolize Rome's eternal virtue, became a monument to degradation, its very architecture complicit in the empire's moral collapse. The clear lesson is that when power corrupts sacred institutions into tools of oppression, it undermines the values they represent, urging us to protect civic spaces from exploitation to preserve societal integrity. Yet, as the palace became a brothel of imperial design, Caligula's depravity infiltrated even deeper, perverting Rome's sacred rituals, compelling us to explore how he twisted religious ceremonies into acts of sexual desecration. Integrating sex into religious ceremonies. Imagine a sacred temple where the faithful gather to honor the gods, now desecrated by the emperor's perverse demands, as priestesses are forced into acts that defile their vows and the very sanctity of worship. As the palace itself became a monument to degradation, Caligula's ambition to dominate every facet of Roman life led him to corrupt the empire's spiritual core, twisting religious ceremonies into grotesque displays of his divine pretensions. By 40 AD, Caligula's self-deification reached its zenith as he proclaimed himself a living god and demanded worship from his subjects. This megalomania infiltrated Rome's religious practices, perverting sacred rituals into spectacles of sexual desecration. According to Suetonius in the 12 Caesars, Caligula ordered priestesses, women who had taken vows of chastity, to perform public sexual acts as part of religious ceremonies, framing these violations as divine communion with the emperor god. One documented incident involved the Vestal Virgins, Rome's most revered priestesses, who were compelled to participate in rituals where sexual intercourse was presented as a sacred offering to Caligula's divinity. These acts, staged in temples, adorned with his statues, shattered centuries of religious tradition as worshippers were forced to witness or partake in what they knew to be sacrilege. The emperor's actions not only defiled individual priestesses, but also eroded public faith in Rome's religious institutions, as temples, once sanctuaries of moral order, became sites of imperial depravity. Psychologically, this conflation of divine worship with sexual exploitation left the populace in a state of moral confusion, as loyalty to the emperor clashed with reverence for the gods. Socially, it undermined the authority of the priestly class and destabilized the religious cohesion that underpinned Roman identity. Caligula's perversion of faith served as a tool to assert his supremacy over both the mortal and divine realms, demonstrating that no aspect of Roman life was beyond his reach. The lesson here is stark. When political power appropriates divine authority, it can exploit faith to justify atrocities, reminding us to safeguard the separation between governance and religion to protect both from corruption. Yet, as Caligula desecrated the sacred, his depravity also became a tool of economic control and punishment, compelling us to explore how he wielded sex as a weapon against Rome's wealth and descent. Using sex as an economic weapon and punishment, envision a once proud senator, his coffers drained not by war or famine, but by the emperor's insatiable lust, forced to offer his daughter's innocence as payment for his family's survival. As Caligula's perversion of faith eroded the spiritual fabric of Rome, his depravity seeped into the economic and punitive systems, wielding sex as a weapon to control and subjugate the empire's elite. By 40 AD, Caligula's depravity had reached new heights, with the emperor implementing a grotesque form of taxation that exploited the most intimate aspects of his subjects' lives. According to Suetonius in the 12 Caesars, Caligula established a brothel within the palace walls, staffed by the wives and daughters of senators and other high-ranking officials. These women were forced to service not only the emperor, but also his guests, foreign dignitaries, and even common soldiers, all under the guise of raising funds for the imperial treasury. This sexual tax was a calculated assault on the dignity and honor of Rome's elite. Wealthy families were required to provide their women for specific periods of service, with the duration and frequency determined by their financial status. The most prominent households faced the heaviest demands, their women subjected to repeated violations as a demonstration of their submission to imperial authority. For those who dared to dissent or fell out of favor, the punishment was even more severe. Caligula would order the women of these families to be sold into sexual slavery, their noble status stripped away as they were forced to serve in the palace brothel or sent to the provinces to service soldiers and merchants. This public degradation served as a stark warning to others. No one was beyond the emperor's reach, and defiance would be met with the ultimate humiliation. One particularly harrowing account involves the family of a senator who had criticized Caligula's policies. In retaliation, the emperor ordered the senator's wife and 2 daughters to be paraded through the streets of Rome, stripped of their finery, and then forced to work in the palace brothel for a month. The senator, powerless to intervene, was compelled to watch as his family was publicly shamed, his authority and honor irrevocably destroyed. The psychological impact on the victims and their families was devastating. Women, raised to embody Roman virtue and chastity, were reduced to mere objects of imperial pleasure, their honor irrevocably tarnished. Husbands and fathers, once pillars of Roman society, were rendered powerless, their authority undermined by their inability to protect their loved ones. The shame and trauma inflicted by these acts fractured family bonds, with many marriages collapsing under the weight of forced infidelity and public disgrace. Socially, this system of sexual exploitation eroded the foundations of Roman society. The elite, who had long prided themselves on their moral superiority, were now complicit in their own degradation, their status mocked by the emperor's whims. The palace, once a symbol of Rome's grandeur, became a monument to moral decay, its halls echoing with the silent cries of the oppressed. The clear lesson is that when power is absolute, it can corrupt not only the individual, but also the very structures of society, exploiting the most vulnerable and eroding the foundations of trust and dignity. Yet, as Caligula's actions shattered the economic and social fabric of Rome, the psychological scars they left behind would endure for generations, compelling us to explore the lasting trauma inflicted upon his victims. The enduring psychological trauma. Envision a society where the echoes of imperial depravity reverberate through generations, leaving scars that time cannot heal. As Caligula's reign of terror shattered the economic and social fabric of Rome, the psychological scars inflicted upon his victims would endure long after his death, shaping the collective memory of the empire. The victims of Caligula's sexual tyranny faced a lifetime of psychological torment. Women who had been forced into the palace brothel or made to perform in degrading spectacles struggled with shame, guilt, and a profound sense of violation. Many were unable to return to their former lives, their reputations irreparably damaged in a society that prized honor above all else. Men, too, bore the weight of their experiences. Husbands and fathers who had been powerless to protect their families grappled with feelings of inadequacy and rage. Some turned to violence or self-destruction, while others withdrew from public life, their spirits broken by the emperor's cruelty. Children who had witnessed or been subjected to Caligula's abuses carried their trauma into adulthood. Many grew up with a warped understanding of power and sexuality, perpetuating cycles of abuse in their own lives. Others became fiercely protective of their own families, determined to shield them from the horrors they had endured. The collective trauma of Caligula's reign left an indelible mark on Roman society. Trust in authority was eroded, and the once clear lines between public and private life were blurred. The Senate, already weakened by decades of imperial overreach, found itself further diminished, its members haunted by memories of their own degradation. Historical accounts from Suetonius and Cassius Dio paint a picture of a society grappling with the aftermath of unprecedented abuse. Families were torn apart, alliances shattered, and the very fabric of Roman social life was strained to the breaking point. Yet, in the face of such devastation, there were those who sought to rebuild and heal. The new emperor, Claudius, though limited in his ability to address the past, worked to restore some semblance of normalcy to Roman governance. But the scars remained, a testament to the enduring impact of Caligula's depravity. The clear lesson is that the wounds of psychological trauma can outlast even the most tyrannical regimes, reminding us of the critical need to address and heal from such experiences, both as individuals and as a society. Throughout this series, we have explored the depths of Caligula's depravity, from his transformation after illness to his abuses of power, his perversion of sacred institutions, and the lasting trauma inflicted upon his victims. His reign serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked authority and the devastating consequences of allowing power to corrupt absolutely. As we reflect on these dark chapters of history, let us remain vigilant against the forces that seek to exploit and degrade. Let us honor the memory of those who suffered by working to create a world where such abuses are unthinkable, and where the dignity of every individual is upheld. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of history's most harrowing tales. May it serve as a cautionary tale for generations to come.